In this day and age, managing your organization, managing your group, and the group dynamics, it's a different game. People relate to each other in different ways, and leadership of those groups, really the whole attitude towards group interaction, completely different. That's why I'm interviewing Leadership Resources in Lincoln, Nebraska. I'm talking to Boyd Ober over here, and of course Dan Cedor. Dan, you're senior VP here at Leadership Resources. Tell me, what is the new mantra, shall we say, in terms of managing group dynamics and getting the most out of people and facilitating true progress?
Well, I think you just touched on it. I think facilitation is the key. It's less about presenting and being the expert, telling people what they need to know.
Yeah.
Because let's face it, in this day and age with the internet, everybody knows everything. I mean, there's so much information available now more than ever. So I think the key is in facilitation is how do you get people to think for themselves, come up with their own ideas, and ultimately get them to act upon them, and that way they own their own thoughts.
It kind of sticks that way. If you but it takes a certain amount of patience to plant seeds and then say, okay, what do you think about that, right? Because sometimes they don't know what to think, right?
True.
Absolutely. Boyd, tell me, when Leadership Resources facilitates interaction with groups, is there some particular tactic or technique that you try to use, or is it more of just an attitudinal thing? How do you do such a great job in that regard?
Well, the key thing is for the facilitators to care more about the individuals and their knowledge than it is about their own. And if it's about their
So it's attitudinal?
It's very much attitudinal. Dan has a lot of knowledge, but when Dan tries to tell people what they need to know,
they don't listen?
They're less inclined to want to know.
My kids don't. So.
Right.
That's why it's more important for him to be the facilitator and pull that knowledge out. We really believe that people in the audience, most of the time, have the answers. It's about how do you get to those answers by asking the right questions.
And how do you get to those answers? Do you plant a couple seeds and say, here's a principle, here's a general idea, here's a trend, what do you think? Or how do you do it?
Yeah. Well, it starts with the environment. In any environment, and when you're in a room with somebody, you've got to find a way to get the environment to be safe, where people feel like they can say what they're thinking.
That's not an easy thing to do.
It's not, but it's something we do very well.
Okay.
There's many ways to get there, but the reality is once people are comfortable and they start really being honest with themselves and sharing openly what they're thinking, it's amazing when we hear something and we're like, oh, that's not good, is it? So we catch ourselves as well as anybody else if we allow it to come out. But the key is we've got to, as a facilitator, we've got to keep in mind right is relative. I mean,
what does that mean, right is relative? There's truth and there's not truth, or what?
Good point. It's not about truth. It's about what's right. Because, as I'm talking to my son, he can say, you know what, Dad, this is what it should be. And I'm like, I can't argue the point that he's right. But how the approach is taken, when it's taken, and how people receive it can greatly impact the value of that, and people won't respond very positively. So just because you're right doesn't make it accurate, and people are going to act upon it.
I see. So the message is good, but how it's the tonality of the message,
that can be part of it.
How it's structured.
The timing, you bet.
What are some of the toughest things that you run into when you're dealing with groups? Are they stubborn? Are they uptight? They don't want to unburden themselves or be transparent with you, Boyd? What are your thoughts along those lines? What do you run into that you look at Dan and say, wow, this is going to be rough?
Well, when you look at it, you do want to understand the personalities of the individual, but you also want to understand the personalities of the culture. The culture of the organization.
How people are around here.
Absolutely. If the culture of the organization is one of very dictatorial nature, facilitation takes a while to take hold, because when you start asking people what they think, and they've always been told what to think, it really does challenge the whole art of facilitation. That's when the quality of that facilitator is so important. And how somebody has been brought up, have they really ever been given the opportunity to share their thoughts in a safe environment? So we as facilitators, Dan's group particularly, really need to be experts in understanding how the audience interprets what they're asking.
Okay. I know you guys are great listeners. You ask important questions and then you try to make sure that you listen and absorb what they say. Do you ever just find yourself working with workers who simply don't have the big picture? They don't really get it? What do you do with that type of situation? Or maybe there's insight there that I'm not fully recognizing.
Well, it's all relative to the situation. Some individuals are more in tune with the organization than others. If nothing else, one thing we do at Leadership Resources before we work with a group of people is we get some direction and perspective from the leadership that's supporting the initiative to make sure that we have some end in mind. And then we encourage and help get that information to the participants. At least they know what they're shooting for. And at least we have a chance then to point towards something out here, and if people don't go that direction, at least we can ask them why not, and where are they going, and eventually we help people see where they need to go, and ultimately it's about their choices. I mean, facilitation is, I don't have the answers in facilitating. I'll bring the questions, but people really have the answers.
You know, if a little bit of advice here, Boyd Ober, if a CEO or a GM of a company wanted to prepare his group for your arrival,
right?
All right, we're going to bring these guys in. We're going to really talk, and we're going to really figure things out.
Yeah.
What's the best way to prepare them for your arrival and your involvement? What can they do so that when you're there, it's really a productive interaction?
Yeah. I thought about saying roll out the red carpet.
That would only go this far. Continue.
But the reality, Lynn, as you look at that, is when somebody's preparing for any facilitator to come in or leadership resources in this example, it's really about talking to them about the dynamics of what's going to happen, to share with them, here's why we're going through this particular exercise.
Okay. All right.
You know, I've engaged this group. They're going to ask a series of questions, and I really want your authentic answer, and there are no wrong answers. So that communication by the leader in advance for someone like ourselves to come in and ask deeper questions.
Yeah.
If you really want them to share it, they have to know that the leaders authorize safe communication.
Safe communication. Well, I tell you what, that's outstanding. Dan, anything else you want to add to this so that we really understand how to manage today's group and the complexity of it all?
There's so much to talk about in this field, but I would say this. A good facilitator is going to be a servant leader. And they're there for the others, and Boyd alluded to it. They're there for others. They're not there to get their own agenda in there. They're there to help guide people in a direction that's productive and positive, and really to draw out the inner potential, the inner capacity of every individual, and that's the true agenda. And that's not always the norm. That really is key.
And there's a huge value, Lynn. The huge value is when it's facilitated, there's group buy-in.
Yeah.
When they're being told, it becomes more about, man, I have to do that, I have to be compliant. And when you're facilitated and they get to be part of the solution,
yes.
Wow. Everybody participates, and no one's idea is more valuable than the others.
That's called deep learning.
Yes.
Yeah.
Deep learning, and that's where commitment comes from.
Outstanding. Well, Dan Seedor and Boyd Ober with Leadership Resources in Lincoln, thank you so much for kind of sharing the inside secrets of what it takes to do what we're doing right here. And thank you for watching WowBizTV. I'm Lynn Hinderrocker. We'll see you next time.